The work of the Wichita Public Schools is to empower all students with 21st century skills and knowledge necessary for success by providing a coherent, rigorous, safe and nurturing, culturally responsive, and inclusive learning community. Roll call. I see all board members present. The one item that we have for tonight is a little bit of a discussion with our attorney for the superintendent search. So I'm going to ask Tom to come to the microphone and talk with us, please.
My purpose today, I think, is just to give a short legal perspective. So if somebody's hoping for a long-winded legalese discussion, that probably won't happen. And it probably won't happen because there isn't a whole lot that I can say about this. I've handed a handout that I'll refer to as I go through this. The first thing I've handed out is a copy of the statute that talks about the superintendent and the board's role, and it couldn't be simpler, really. It says, first of all, the board's responsible for appointing a superintendent. Well, you knew that before you read that. And the second thing it says is if a vacancy occurs, the vacancy of the superintendent's office, that it shall be filled promptly. Well, you've got till July 1st, and that doesn't mean July 1st you have to have a new superintendent, but if you don't have a new superintendent, you should have a interim superintendent July 1st or shortly thereafter. So that's what that means. And the third thing says the superintendent of schools shall have charge and control of the public schools of the school district, subject to the orders, rules, and regulations of the Board of Education. So the law is pretty clear on that. I think one other law that you all are, I'm sure, are familiar with is that there is a qualification to be superintendent, and that is you have a district level license from the state of Kansas. So that's another pretty simple qualification. And John could tell you a lot more about this than I can, but if you're coming from out of state, doesn't mean you can't hire somebody from out of state, but there's a reciprocity process to get somebody licensed in the state of Kansas pretty quickly, right, John?
Correct. There's a opportunity to apply, and you can be granted a temporary certificate if there are other requirements or class that you would need to take with an out-of-state certificate.
The second handout I have for you is the board policy on superintendent of schools. And it really more or less repeats what's in the statute. The board shall appoint a qualified superintendent of schools. One other extra qualification that this has is it's not in the state statute. It says they can't be a member of the school board. I wonder why that was in there ever, but there must have been a reason.
Thank you. No, thank you.
It says the term of the superintendent shall begin 1st of July and continue for not more than 3 years. Of course, that's in the state statute. You can enter into a contract with the superintendent up to 3 years. And I just point out in the past, at least every time I've been involved or around, when you hired a superintendent, you hired them for 3 years, which I think is kind of expected. And it again talks about delegating the responsibility of administrating the schools to the superintendent in this policy. And then it says if there's a vacancy, the board shall promptly fill the vacancy. The other areas that I think that you should be aware of aren't, they don't involve the qualifications or how you go about hiring a superintendent, but they deal with two laws. One's the Kansas Open Meetings Law, and the other one's the Kansas Open Records Law. And I think those two laws are just kind of important to have, for you all to have a little bit of background as you go into this search. And I'll start with the Kansas Open Records Law. I thought I had a copy of it, but essentially it has a provision in there that says that you can go into executive discussion to discuss personnel matters. And one of the handouts I have for you is a Kansas Attorney General's opinion that interprets that statement that's in the Kansas Open Records Law that says you can. And I think one of the important things, and I've got it highlighted on the next page, one of the important things that you need to understand is the purpose of this personnel exception in the Open Records Law. And as stated in this Attorney General's opinion, it's to protect the privacy of employees, save personal reputations, and to encourage qualified people to select and remain in the employment of the government. So that's the purpose. You can see it's to protect an individual. And this opinion goes on to talk about, the next opinion goes on to talk about a little bit more about what that means. This next opinion, somebody wrote the Attorney General and said, can we discuss matters concerning consolidation of departments and addition or elimination of job functions or positions? And what this case says is no, you can't discuss those matters because those are matters of general discussion that don't involve individuals, because the purpose of the personnel exception is to protect reputations and to encourage qualified people to apply for the candidate. So you can keep the process in executive session when you're discussing individuals, when you interview individuals, and when you consider the individual for a position. That's what an executive session under the open records exception for personnel exception is about. The other area is Kansas Open Records Act, and without that it wouldn't do you any good to be able to discuss anything in executive session, because it would become known who the candidate was through an open records request. Well, the personnel exception to the open records law says that personnel records, performance ratings, it says everything but names, positions, salaries, or actual compensation, employment compensation contracts, or employment-related contracts or agreements, and length of services of officers of employees are subject to disclosure. The name, position, salary, actual compensation is subject to disclosure once they are employed. And there is Attorney General's opinions that says what this means is that you don't have to disclose the names of applicants for employment. So that's how the last time we went through this process, the names of applicants as they applied weren't known by the public at large, because it is something that is exempted from being disclosed under the open records law. That's really about all that I think from a legal perspective that I need to tell you about. I think that the process, subject to what I've told you, is really up to the board. By process, all the things you can think of, but one example that I can think of is community involvement. Whether you have community involvement, how much community involvement you have, all aspects of that, that's really up to the board, and that's the board's decision. And any other areas like that would also be the board's decision. The process of how you go about hiring, taking applications, hiring people, hiring a person to do be superintendent is really all processes that is going to be decisions of the board. The only caveat is that, again, those aren't things you can talk about in executive session. Those are things that have to be decided in an open meeting. And actually, the one last thing that has to be decided in an open meeting is the vote to hire a superintendent. That can't be done in executive session. That has to be in an open meeting.
Are there questions?
Tom, say that last bit again, starting with, you talked about hiring the superintendent, and we can't talk about the qualities.
You can you can discuss everything about the candidate. You can discuss the qualities, and you can give your thoughts as to who you want to hire in executive session, but a binding vote cannot occur in executive session. You all have to go out into an open session and vote to hire a superintendent.
One step before that, I think, the parameters say we want somebody that is outgoing and doesn't have gray hair or whatever you want to come up with. Those that needs to be talked about in open meeting, but when you're talking about a specific person to a specific person about their
That
specific...
person's hair is not gray enough. Yeah, that'd be something you could talk about at executive session.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Tom.
Other questions?
Tom, I just wanted to, I think you said this, but I just want to confirm. These are the same laws that were in place the last time when the board hired Superintendent Allison. So we're following the same procedures that the board at that time did.
That's right.
Okay.
And if you follow yes, these are the same requirements
Okay.
that they followed that you need to follow.
And so, did several of you serve at that time? I can't remember who all. Four of you were, you three and Barb?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Barbara, Jeff, Betty, and Lynn were all on the board when the selection for John happened.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, Lynn, I'm sorry.
Tom, we're not required, but we're allowed to have a search firm if we want to choose there.
That's part of the process.
If we do that, are we required to do an RFP, or can we select one without? Is there a difference? The last time we did an RFP.
By state statute and under state law, you are not required to do an RFP.
Okay. I think if we would want to go that route, I think that would probably be a good choice, just because we got to interview each of the RFP or each of the companies to see what we liked and didn't like. But again, we're not required to. If we wanted to hire, do it internally on our own staff, we could do that as well if we so chose.
You could just say, we want to use this firm.
Or if we wanted to select someone in particular, we could do that. We have
Yes.
any variety. And again, what we talked about last time was having community involvement, and that was one of the elements that we asked for the search firm, was that they did some due diligence for us in terms of talking to different groups in the community. I want to say 30 or 40 different organizations and groupings of citizens. It wasn't just a organization of going to a certain group. It was, citizens, culture groups, those kinds of things, to visit with them about what they thought was important in a superintendent. So, thank you.
Okay, I just want to summarize for myself to make sure I'm understanding exactly what you said. Basically, in open session, we can talk about anything we want to.
Right.
In open session.
Right.
When we go to executive session, we truly have to be talking about people,
Right.
names attached to a person.
Right.
So for us to just go in and talk about consulting firms, we can't do that.
Right.
Okay. That's what I thought you said. I just wanted to make sure. Other questions?
I think I would just say, from my perspective, it's great to have this information and understand what we should and shouldn't be doing. I think, from my perspective, having an open process where the community hears what we're doing and what we're thinking is a great thing. It's something the board has had a lot of conversations over the last years. We've talked about budgets and all kinds of opportunities and issues that we faced. We've had those open conversations and input from the community, and so I think the law fits the standard that we as a board have tried to have. So I think that going forward will be good for us.
And I know many of you have seen the agenda for Monday night, but we do have on the agenda Monday night a time for us to have a discussion about all the kinds of things that we've been talking about. Do we do this? Do we do that? And at that time, we will have an open discussion and hopefully make some startup kinds of decisions. This is a process. It doesn't start and stop unless we start it and stop it. So, Lynn, did you have something?
I guess the other thing I wanted to just bring the board, or at least talk about, because there's been some stuff in the paper and whatnot. It took us about a year last time to replace Winston. But I guess at the same point, I wanted to make sure that we put that in context. I believe, and Tom or someone else can maybe correct me, when we started that process, the superintendent told us he was leaving in March and then served to the end of June. That was right in the middle of a process where the board had a bond issue going. Originally, it was scheduled for May. We delayed it till November, and then as a board, we chose to basically start the RFP process after July 1st. And so we spent the fall during the bond issue campaign deciding on the RFP, and then most of the superintendent search started in January and February. I believe that's correct. And then we selected, I believe, in March. So I guess what I want to say is that it doesn't necessarily have to take a year again because we don't have a bond issue in place. I would not suggest we put a bond issue in place on top of all the other things that we have. But I think it's doable to, if we wanted to do something between now and June, we could definitely move in that direction if we so chose.
Betty?
And while I think it's good for us to look at the process that we utilized when hiring Mr. Allison, I also would like to point out there are, like Lynn said, a lot of different factors that were in place. So I wouldn't necessarily say that should be the hard and fast pattern that we use in this current search. It's a time to perhaps encourage each of us to talk with our community members, to get feedback from them, so that when we do start the conversation, it's with an idea of engaging the community, letting our district constituents talk to us about what they would like to see. And the other thing that I think is interesting as well is, again, if we're having this discussion on Monday to talk about some kind of time process, that really is important. John is going to be with us through July. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would want a break in that. If we're able to get someone in sooner, then that's a great thing because of the transition. So, while we have that pattern, I hope that none of us feel like that's the hard and fast rule that we should be using in this process.
Jeff?
The only thing that concerns me about this search is we're under a tight budget already. And, search firms are not cheap. So I just want to make sure that we understand that we need to do our due diligence the best we can because we don't have a lot of money to spend. We're on a very tight budget. So matter of fact, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we'll figure out a way, I'm sure. But I just want to make sure that we try to stay focused and be very conscious of the money aspect of this and try to save face with the public and our unions and stuff. So
Very good. Thank you. Barb?
Jeff, I would agree with you as far as the amount of money we're going to have and those kinds of things. And I really think that the different meetings that we have, that we really delve down into what we're thinking of as a group of 7. So we're not piecing it here and then it's 2 weeks later and that kind of thing. And there's no use bringing people in if we don't have time to listen to them and work with them, or if they're not interested. I do appreciate you bringing that up.
Any other discussion?
Well, bringing that comment in, glad you did, Jeff.
It's all about money.
It's all about money anymore. It seems like everything we do is about money.
That's sad.
Do we need to set a budget for this? Where does the money come from? We don't have any free money right now to spend on pretty much anything, let alone to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on a firm to find us somebody that they might find us or they might not.
Your typical cost is going to be somewhere between 20 and 28,000 when you look at some of the 4 or 5 national search firms, if that's the direction you'd go, and then there'll be some potential transportation costs depending on how many candidates you would have coming from out of the region, but that's usually going to be in that low on the 20 end. A lot of the cost depends on, as like Mr. Rogers mentioned, the number of community meetings, how far out you want those spread, if they can be done in a couple of days, because part of their estimated cost will depend on how much time it'll take to bring in their staff to do those types of things. So that's not guaranteed depending on what the board would request, but that's probably a pretty consistent range.
So about what you're saying is about $25,000 to $35,000 would be a...
Yeah, 20 to 30 is probably a pretty good range.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Joy?
I don't think we want to get the cart too far before the horse, because I think the first thing as a board that we really need to talk about is what kind of person, what are the qualities of the person, and what kind of job do we expect them to do before we can make decisions about where to go. And then just another piece of perspective, yes, $20,000 to $28,000 is a lot of money. I don't have that sitting in my bank account. But we're talking about hiring a person that will manage a budget over $600 million a year and lead the education of our most precious resource in Wichita. And so when we spend money as a city looking for the right police department chief, and we spend money on other heads when it's time to look for them, I think we need to think about what's the right thing to do for the situation, and then we'll figure out those pieces down the road. And I'm not advocating one way or the other, because I don't have an answer right now. It's the first time we've all sat down and talked about this. In fact, I was on vacation, so it's not a fun way to come back. But just to say, let's start with the big picture. What do we want our school district to look like in 10 years or 5 years, and what kind of person needs to help us go there? And then we can work out the details of what that looks like.
But I think even more important is the real question: are we going to look internal or external for this search? Because the truth of the matter is, if we decide to do an internal approach, then that eliminates the need for spending money for a search firm. My thought being, we're talking about Kansas grown. We're talking about individuals that public schools have produced. And to give our internal people an opportunity to step forth, to make application, for us to consider them, I feel like that's only fair to our individuals, because it's time for us to let our own know that we believe in them. And in all honesty, we do have a number of quality people already. So I think the real question from my perspective would be, are we going to go internal? Are we going to go external? Or are we going to combine them both? And once you make that decision, then the idea of, do we hire a search firm, would come into place.
The only
Lynn?
The only other thing I would add to, when we did the last search, I don't know the precise number of applicants. Excuse me. I know there were a lot, and part of what our search firm did was help narrow down based on our guidelines. We asked them for certain qualifications, and they were able to narrow that down for us. helped vet the candidates and things of that nature. And I'm not disagreeing with Betty at all. But one of the nice things about that was that takes a lot of pressure off of your internal HR department, who ultimately will work for that person, as well as, I guess, because we are the largest district, I would anticipate that we would get a lot of outside, applicants, some qualified, some not. So again, depending on how we structure that, that could make a difference as well. But I like, we do definitely need to talk about the qualifications and kind of a reset. Where are we headed in the right direction? Are we doing the right thing? And then even a discussion of internal, if we've got adequate candidates, that'd be a good discussion for us to have as well.
I think those are the kinds of things that we absolutely need to talk about. And Monday night will be the start of our conversation on that, and probably many other things as well. So, other things that you would like to add this evening? Okay. Anything else that you want to add, Tom?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay. John?
No, ma'am.
Very fine. I think that ends our discussion this evening. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Okay, I heard the motion from Jeff and the second from Joy. Then to adjourn the meeting, may I have you answer with a yes or vote, or a nay, yay or nay?
Yay.
Yay and nay both work. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. We will see you Monday evening.